Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, worshippers of all ages, welcome to YouTube. My name is SeaRaptor, and today we've got our first look for you. This is going to be the first ship in the forthcoming French cruiser branch. Here we have Tier VIII's Cherbourg. Cherbourg is, if you've watched the Toulon video from a few days ago, this is basically an extension of the same concept, although now, unlike Toulon, which is a premium ship, now we're carrying this thing over into the tech tree. So what they haven't explained yet, we haven't seen a picture, we don't know yet if the branch will come at Algerie, down at Tier 7, or if this will be a direct branch off of Charles Martel at Tier 8, but somewhere in there you'll have to earn extra XP in one of those ships to unlock this ship and slide over into this alternate French cruiser branch. Now, down here at Tier 8, kind of same thing as we were talking about in the Toulon video, there's not a lot of contemporaries. The only other ship in this tier, the only other cruiser, I should say, in this tier with this caliber of guns is Tier 8 American Premium USS Congress, which is in itself essentially a neutered Alaska, right? Like you've taken, Congress is basically taken Alaska, stripped 2 barrels off of it, drop it a tier, tweak a couple of things, and bam, away you go, right? It's not an overly complicated ship. Cherbourg here is very obviously related to Toulon, but there are some pretty notable differences that are going to change how you play this ship, and I think she's going to be a real challenge, honestly. The more I look over this ship, the more I go, how do they expect that to work precisely? So let's get into it here, and we'll talk about it. First things first, survivability. There is a lot to like here. 49,500 hit points. Now, again, this is not quite best in tier because Congress exists, but it's easily in the top 2. Good for second place, right behind the other super cruiser available at Tier 8. So that's nice to see. This is essentially the same health pool as you would find on Tier 9 German regular heavy cruiser Rune. One branch up, one rung up the ladder, right? So a lot of health to throw around on the board. 25% torpedo protection is not quite best in tier, but it's really good. It's very much on the high end. Only Tier 8 French Premium Bayard seems to outstrip her in this category, and only by a couple of percentage points. So a lot of health, a lot of torpedo protection, lots to like there. Armor. There's also some improvements here on the armor scheme over what we saw down at Toulon on Toulon down at Tier 7. For starters, the bow. Toulon has 16mm extremities. Here we see 25mm extremities. Now, this is not amazing in the sense of you're not going to be able to bow tank 15-inch plus armed battleships, and you're going to see a lot of those in her matchmaking bracket. But it is an improvement, and you will still find the occasional 14-inch armed battleship in her matchmaking bracket, say California or King George V, and she will be able to bow tank those ships without being overmatched. So keep that in mind, okay? 15-inch and up, bad. 14-inch and below, doable, okay? The other big improvement here is to her casemate armor and her deck armor here throughout the midships. You see here 27mm versus the 25mm we saw down on Toulon. Now that sounds like a very minor difference, but it crosses an important threshold. Opposing light cruisers, I'm looking at you, say Cleveland, will no longer be able to full pin her deck without investing points in the IFHE skill. So that's noteworthy, right? It's a lot of the cruisers will invest in that skill, okay? But the bottom line is if they don't, you will not take as much damage off of those shells. They'll shatter on your deck, and you'll be looking at fires, but not full pins. Quick look at her belt armor. See here, 170mm, just like we saw down at Toulon, although now we're actually adding in a bit of a turtleback. You can see it in here. I've got a slope on the Citadel, 25mm. Nice to see. And in fact, let's show you the Citadel because this is also kind of noteworthy in my opinion. Look how tiny that Citadel is. Here, let me strip away even the torpedo bulge. Look how tiny that Citadel is, right? Like, it's incredibly narrow. It's barely the width of the turret barbettes, right? If you look down the long axis of the ship. So there's a huge gap between the outer hull of the ship and the actual inner Citadel bulkhead. It does cover the magazines from forward to the forward barbette all the way just after the superstructure. So it's quite large, but it does sit pretty low in the water, right? Not much of this protrudes above the waterline. And like most French ships, by the time you put the torpedo bulge in here, there's a giant cavity and massive gap in here for plunging fire shells to rattle around and get lost and not really do much. So if you're planning on fighting at longer ranges, and let's be honest, you should be planning on fighting at longer ranges in this ship, The armor scheme is at least kind of optimized, quote unquote, set up to deal with it a little better than it might otherwise be. So good to see. So some changes to the armor scheme from what we were seeing down at Tier 7, and good ones, in my opinion. Maneuverability and concealment, 31.9 knots, 670 on the turning circle, 12.5 on the rudder shift. This is still below average speed for a Tier 8 cruiser. The gap is not as large as it was down at Tier 7. Like in Tier 7, Toulon was one of the 2 slowest cruisers possible in the tier. Here, there's a lot of ships, a lot of Tier 8 cruisers, right, in this 32-ish knot range. So speed-wise, I mean, you're right there with, say, Hipper and Eugen and Belfast 43 and Cleveland and Baltimore. You're all in that same kind of half-knot speed. There's a lot of contemporaries in this speed bracket. So nothing to get too overly concerned about there. 670 on the turning circle for a ship this size is really noteworthy. Like, this ship, like, again, I can't play the ship and give you an impression of the ship. But I'll tell you right now, this turning circle is better than Charles Martel. This is essentially a Cleveland turning circle on a ship that is significantly fatter, like way more beam, and what looks to be probably another 10 to 15% longer overall length than a Cleveland. But she's going to handle way better than Toulon did down at Tier 7. So that's interesting to note, I think. The rudder shift is pretty bad. Like, that's worst in tier. She's going to be slow to respond to the rudder. And that's, I mean, again, for a ship this size, that shouldn't really shock you. Now, let's talk about concealment. This is a big one, because what we saw down at Toulon, right, was a ship that when you full rig it for stealth had a surprising amount of stealth. Here at Tier 8, when we get to the tech tree ships, we're seeing the exact opposite. 15.7 base to surface detection is worst in tier. No other Tier 8 cruiser is as detectable as Cherbourg. Not even Congress, right? Congress starts at 15.5 and goes down from there. A full stealth rig Cherbourg is 12.3 on the surface. So this thing has, super cruiser detectability. I mean, let's be honest. The trick is that as we kind of pointed out, she doesn't really have an armor scheme that's all that amazing. It's okay for dealing with opposing cruisers, but as soon as you start getting shot at by, well, just about anything else, you're going to be in a bit of trouble. So I feel like that's something that you're going to have to manage with position and range games, and we'll talk about that as we get into the main battery. But yeah, just keep in mind that this is not a ship you're going to hide from just about anybody. You have basically the same detection that a Hindenburg has, and we all know just how stealthy a Hindenburg is, right? So yeah, keep that in mind. There's not a lot to get excited about there. All right, main battery. Down at Tier 7, talking about Toulon, we saw the 2 quadruple-barreled 305mm turrets. Cherbourg's main battery is essentially the same. I have 2 quadruple-barreled 305mm turrets, still on a 28-second reload. So all of that is the same. What's different? For starters, the turret traverse. These turrets will swivel faster. You see there, a base of 30 seconds. That's noteworthy. It means you'll be able to get your guns on target just that much faster. I still don't feel like this ship is a brawler, right? We talked about the bow armor being able to potentially bow tank a battleship, and maybe, right? Like in a pinch, maybe, if you're up against a KG-5 or something. But like, I still don't think it's a great idea to take this ship into brawling range, okay? Even with the turtleback armor and everything else we've seen. What else is noteworthy? The caliber on the barrels, okay? These are 50 caliber barrels rather than the 45 caliber guns that we saw down at Toulon on Tier 7. These are also a more updated version of the barrel. You see there, MLE 1930. The ones we saw down at Tier 7 were MLE 1910. They were literally the same barrels, were stripped right off the Tier 4 battleship. These are improved, like same concept for the gun, but a more improved, updated, longer caliber version of the barrel, meaning you're going to get more shell velocity out of these barrels, and you see that here. I'm looking at 905 on the HE and 870 on the AP. The ballistics of these guns is significantly improved over that of Tier 7's Toulon. So that's all really good. Like, there's a lot more to like about these guns. They're going to be easier to lead. The shells are going to get round downrange faster. They're going to have more penetration, and I'll put some flight time curves in here so you can see just exactly the differences we're talking about, but it is noteworthy. The bad side, okay? 17.7 on the main battery range is thoroughly average. This is the exact same range you're getting out of Hipper, Charles Martel, Congress herself. Like, it's towards the high end for a Tier 8 cruiser, don't get me wrong. I mean, Kutuzov still laughs at everybody. But the bottom line is that you're not going to outrange a Tier 8 heavy cruiser, right? If you get into a duel with a hipper, let's just pick one for example, you and he have basically the same range. You don't have an advantage there the way a typical Tier 8 battleship has a range advantage on that cruiser. So the very thing that you're designed to hunt, more or less, you're going to be engaging kind of on his terms, okay? Think about this ship. You're designed to hunt other cruisers, but every other cruiser in your matchmaking bracket, well, I won't say in bracket, in your tier, okay, in your tier, outspots you, and you don't have a range advantage. So they're going to have total control over when that engagement begins and what position they begin that engagement from, presuming a one-on-one engagement, no other spotting going on, okay? So I feel like these ships are going to be a bit of a challenge to play. Again, this is all speculative, and I might be full of crap, but it just feels that way to me, having played a lot of Tier 8 cruiser over the years. So range is a bit of an issue, just because you don't really have any advantages going for you there. The other one is dispersion. We saw this on Toulon, down at Tier 7 at the premium. We're seeing it here as well. That dispersion, 197 on the dispersion ellipse for this kind of range is not amazing. It's basically the same dispersion ellipse, dispersion calculations that you're getting out of Congress. Congress put 7 shells into this ellipse. You're putting 8 shells into this ellipse. I mean, yay. If you have a Congress, you know how frustrating it is to fire those guns and frequently not hit a lot. You're going to have the same problem with Cherbourg, in my opinion. And the reload here is significantly worse than Congress, right? Congress reloads every 22 seconds. For your extra barrel, you're reloading every 28 seconds. Yikes. Okay. The shells themselves, again, we talked about the shell velocity and the ballistics. They are better than what we saw down at Toulon at Tier 7. And then the damage on the HE shell, all that's identical. The AP shell gets a little bit of a damage buff, 8,200 there versus 8,000 down we saw at Tier 7. And, of course, you compare that to the American Super Heavies, which are 8,900 AP. So the Americans have a bit more of an AP punch there than you do. Even their HE is better in terms of Congress's HE hits harder and has a higher fire chance, a significantly higher fire chance, by the way. It's the main battery on this ship. Just I don't know. It feels like it's going to need some work as they go through testing. Personal opinion. This ship has, if you want, so many people like to focus on DPM numbers. Let's talk about DPM. Okay. The HE DPM of this ship is worst in tier, and it's not even remotely close, right? Your HE DPM in this ship is right at about 70,000, okay? Congress is about 10,000 more, around 80-ish or so. The next lowest is going to be something like Cheshire, Hipper, and Eugen are all in the 100,000 range in terms of, this is just straight HE. So the average Tier 8 heavy cruiser with their HE grossly outdamages you, okay? AP is the same problem, okay? From a DPM perspective, because of your reload, your DPM is terrible. What are you getting in exchange? Your throw weight, okay? The salvo throw weight. The maximum potential damage you can land out of any single salvo is basically best in tier. You're even beating out Congress because, despite the reload, you have the extra barrel. So this ship is essentially designed for that alpha strike, whether it's HE or AP, probably the AP. You're probably out trying to hunt cruisers, right? But once you're in a fight, your sustained damage is terrible. It's well below basically all of your contemporaries on a hull that is not exactly designed for long fights, let's be honest, right? Against an opposing light cruiser, maybe, and that's still going to depend on their captain build. But an opposing heavy cruiser, he's going to pin you all day long with whatever he throws at you. HE, HE shells particularly, but even the AP will probably pin most of your upper works at the right angle. So not a ship really that's built for sustained fights. I'm not quite sure what that means exactly, only that I know that it's going to be a challenge, I think, to get good work out of this main battery. Quick look at the secondary battery, comprised solely of a bunch of double-barreled 130mm secondary turrets, just kind of scattered around the ship here. You've got 7 of them, 3 down each side, and then 1 back aft, right along the center line. These are dual-purpose batteries. They'll contribute to your AA, but if you remember down at Toulon had a pair of 6-inch triples back here on the stern. Here for Cherbourg, those are gone. You basically have none of that beefier secondary armament like Toulon had down at Tier 7. She does have an airstrike. Yay. You've got 7 kilometers of range. Yeah, don't get in a fight with the submarine. He'll kick your ass. That's pretty much how this works right now. AA. Okay, so Tier 8 is what is kind of the break point, right? There's a lot of really good AA boats at Tier A, and people, it's a whole, I just heard an entire room full of people roll their eyes at me, okay? But there are a non-zero number of really decent ships for AA at Tier 8, and it's not just Bagration and Cheshire, right? There's more than that. Um, Cherbourg's AA for the tier is thoroughly average, okay? She's putting up 4 flak puffs, pretty average. 1,400 damage on each puff is pretty average. So there's nothing to get it excited about in the flak, okay? The long range AA is only 84 DPS. I mean, again, it's a little on the high side, but no, it's not really that exciting. There's a lot of 110, 170, 145, 190 if you're Bagration. So yeah, this is not anything to get excited about. Middle bubble, only 133. This is a tier where the overwhelming majority of her contemporaries start to just slather the ship in 40mm Bofors, and you've got none of that. You've got the 37mm mounts, and they're good, but you don't have a lot of them. You only got 6 doubles there, you can see. So mid-range bubble, not anything to get excited about. Your inner range bubble still contains, that inner ring still contains most of your punch. It's good, but again, it's going to be good against dive bombers, basically, right? So just like we saw down at Toulon, anybody coming for you with torpedo bombers or rockets, you're going to struggle to fend off that attack. If they're coming with dive bombers, you have a better time. You'll probably get a few more planes along the way. He'll probably still get one drop off, no matter what you do. So, yeah, a ship this detectable with this little AA is always going to feel a little on the bad side, in my opinion. Let's have a quick look at consumables, because this is noteworthy, okay? So let's talk about this. You're a ship in World of Warships, you get a damage control party, just the way it goes, okay? You are French, we are a French cruiser in the tech tree, we get a main battery reload booster. I like this, I'm glad it's here, but, right, it still feels a little lipstick on a pig to me right now. I mean, this is going to lower your main battery reload from 28 seconds down to 14 seconds, and it lasts 15 seconds. So if you time this right, you're going to get 1 extra salvo? Maybe? I mean, maybe that's awesome if you catch a battleship or a cruiser right in the middle of the turn. Like, if you time this just perfectly, maybe. This, to me, is not a huge selling point of the ship. Not the way it is in with the regular French heavy cruisers, right? Those 8-inch guns, this reload drops down to, anywhere from 5 to 7 seconds, depending on the caliber of the gun you're talking about, the ship in question. That means you could get 2, maybe 3 salvos on a broadside cruiser while he's making a turn. That's significant. That could be noteworthy. For this, you're going to get maybe 1 extra. With the throw weight of shells we're throwing, yes, that could be significant, but it is still very RNG dependent, because you're only throwing 8 shells into a larger than average dispersion ellipse for a cruiser in this tier. You do get a standard heal. That's nice to see. You're gonna need this, by the way. You're gonna need this. Okay. Over here in the first slot, you get a choice between defensive fire and hydro. Again, like we saw Toulon, I don't think there's enough base AA to really invest in this. However, as detectable as you are and as vulnerable as you are, this might not be a bad pick, because you're not going to be hunting destroyers with this thing, right? This hydro, if you take it, is basically going to be defensive only. Now, I will point out, like, the hydro with the reload booster means that in a pinch, let's say you took the ship into a ranked battle. In a pinch, you could combine these two things to potentially charge a destroyer that was running away or hiding in smoke or something along these lines. Okay, so there's some potential here for you to get double duty out of the hydro, but in general, this is going to be defensive. Same way with your defensive fire. This is basically your choice of defensive consumable, the way I look at it. And then this slot right here, you're going to have a choice between fighter. You do have aircraft facilities on board, or French engine boost. Let's be honest, you're going to take the engine boost. The fighter is not useful in the current system. If they offered me a spotter plane, this might be a more compelling choice. Remember, a ship like Cherbourg, like we saw at Toulon, I suspect, like we're going to see other ships, it was going to want to play like the Japanese premiums, Ajuma and Yoshino, right? You're going to want to hang back, play at longer ranges, spam the HE, hope for fires, and then later in a game, maybe push up a little bit and be a little more aggressive. But for the first 10 minutes of a game, you're going to want to hang as far back as you can. That spotter plane could be really useful, right? But we don't have it here. You're basically going to be forced into the engine boost. Now, the engine boost is nice. It's going to give you some repositioning options that of course, Ajuma and Yoshino don't have. They're much slower. So 20% speed bonus on 32 knots is another 6.4 knots. This ship will go 38 and change. By the time you put a speed flag on it, you push this button, you'll be kissing 40 knots pretty easily in this ship. That's noteworthy, right? You'll be able to take this thing around and can move it around the board and look for a place to get maximum use out of those guns. So you're going to need that. So yeah, there's a quick look at Tier 8 French cruiser Cherbourg, forthcoming to the tech tree very soon. This ship feels a lot more challenging to play to me than Toulon. Toulon, to me, just all the way it comes together, it just screams to me like, oh, she's a cruiser ambusher, like you got the stealth for it, and so on and so forth. The ship loses the stealth capability. The guns are better. That's good. You need that. But without that extra stealth, like the thing you're designed to do, you're not going to do all that well. It doesn't feel like. So we'll have to see how it works out in practice. I could be full of crap. You never know. We're only looking at stats on paper. Anyway, guys, that's it. Appreciate you tuning in. Wash your hands. Be safe. I'll catch you next time.